Good evening. I'm Gwen O'Brien. Welcome to the second half of the Raising of America, our local follow-up conversation to the documentary. We'll be here for the next 6 weeks talking about early childhood education. You've just watched the first of 5 documentaries about the topic. Joining us for our conversation tonight are experts from our community. Preston Cheney is a member of the 100 Black Men, which sponsors and mentors young African American youth. Cheney is a longtime youth advocate. Sam Santalas is the executive director from La Casa de Amistad, a South Bend program that mentors Hispanic youth and community. Nancy Michael is the director of undergraduate studies, neuroscience, and behavior, and assistant teaching professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Notre Dame. And Dr. Ahmed Elmaadawi is director of the International Psychiatry Program at Beacon Health System and an adjunct assistant professor at Indiana University, South Bend. We're also joined by Wanda Dudley at Ivy Tech Community College in South Bend, where she joins us with a live audience that has been watching the program. We'll be taking questions from that location a little later. If you would like to watch this series in a group, let us know here at WNIT and we can connect you for any of the upcoming episodes. Let's start here in the studio. Dr. Elmaadawi, could you tell us, what do you see in your practice? Do you see these type of family stresses that affect the children?
Thank you, Gwen. It's actually heartbreaking and concerning for our nation to see all these numbers raising for the last decade or so. As a child psychiatrist, actually, we see it at the far end where this continuous stress and the economic factors will have huge impact on the younger kids and teens, and many times they end up in acute crisis without early intervention. So in our practice, we actually intervene, tapping into other services in the community, and unfortunately, many times the services are not really good enough, as the parents usually complain about a single mom who cannot follow up with the visitation or with the treatment, who cannot afford medication. Eventually, she cannot maintain. So that's really concerning, and definitely we struggle with this a lot in our clinic.
So what we saw in the documentary is that you've got stresses beginning even when you're still pregnant with a child, with how am I going to pay for daycare, how am I going to get into daycare, have it be a good daycare, am I going to be able to have time off, and then it continues on if you're a single parent, how much you make a year. How can a family cope in this day and age with all of these stresses?
And the problem is, with a lot of stress, there's always changing in actually how they cope. And eventually, after chronic stress, you change, as we saw in documentary, the pathways in the brain, and it become like the nature, the fear or fight or flight, as we speak, and those kind of stresses. It's actually shut down what we usually call it the prefrontal cortex, or this area in the brain we usually check if everything is okay or not after we experience the fear or the stress. Eventually, when we as a child psychiatrist work with the teenager or children, try to provide therapy, sometimes it's not really effective enough because the chronic stress is actually unable to reach to this prefrontal cortex. And that's what really sometimes we need to use medication or other services to help with this. We try to eliminate the stress as much as we can.
So Dr. Michael, what did you see in the film? What stuck out to you, would you say?
The importance of early life brain development, really. So you can think about the brain learns on the job when it's born. So it's born with this unlimited potential, right? And so much so, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, if you're born in the savannah versus in the Arctic versus in the city, right? We didn't have cities, but to the point, you don't know the environment into which you're going to be born. So the brain learns on the job the skills that are necessary for survival. So in a situation in which families are stressed or there's neglect or abuse, the child will learn what it needs to do to survive, to gain the attention of their caretakers. The problem is that the brain, again, is learning. So you can think about it as a garden, and the parts of the brain that are used are kept, and they become stronger, and the parts of the brain that are unused start to wither away, right? So the more enrichment that a child can have, it kind of keeps that potential as the child grows. But if the child is in a stressed environment, it eliminates pieces of the brain that might be used for creativity, that might be used for empathy, that might be used for problem solving, because that's not the child's immediate survival concern.
Interesting. And I just thought the visual of the serve and return, that test that they were doing, that was fascinating.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of my interaction with a baby or my child, and to see that how much they're doing as a baby, trying to get us engaged. They've got a little toolkit there too, trying to keep it going back and forth, and then how the baby was reacting and trying every trick they could come up with to try to get the attention of the parent. How important is that give and take to the neurological development?
So important.
Wow.
I mean, so important, not only for immediate caretaker-child bonding, but for the development of empathy, for skills on the playground, for being able to work together. So those skills that are developed literally from the time that the child is born, starting from just simple eye contact.
Wow.
To cooing, to laughter, that give and take teaches the child that the environment is safe and that it's predictable and that it's safe to explore them. Without those things, from the earliest days, the child doesn't learn that it's safe and that it's okay to explore, because the child is concerned about survival. So really, I mean, everything in the documentary is spot on.
Wow.
It starts so early for developing those long-term skills.
Does it matter if it's the mother or the father that's the caregiver, or is a daycare okay? Is a babysitter okay? We carry a lot of mommy guilt.
Needs to be
It just
there.
has to be a human.
A caring human that responds and engages.
Okay, so daycare's okay.
Daycare's okay.
All right, we're okay. I want to bring you two into this conversation as well. You're in our community. You're in contact every day with people, families. What struck you, Preston, for example? Let's start with you. What struck you in this film as being a truth?
I think that one of the two things that struck me most of all, Gwen, was the socioeconomic piece, and also the return and serve.
That
really took something to me. But I think that what happens is, what if I throw an elephant in the room and say, why don't we try and target the things that causes some of these problems? The single parent, the breakups in the family, because that's what I see mostly in my community. Is the single parent and also the breakup in the families.
Yeah.
And we just don't have those anymore. And the part that we talked about of the serve and return, I think that we've got a lot of young, I place an emphasis on the word young parents today that don't give, for the kid to give this back, for them to have the empathy, for them to have be able to develop the brain. So I think that there's a lot of things here that we might be looking at, and we don't look at it early enough, because as we know, as it's in the womb, the baby can learn. But however, why don't we target some of those things that causes these problems?
So are you talking about young parents?
I'm talking about what causes, what causes these problems, and that's single parents.
Right.
That's
and all the stresses
families,
that brings.
those type things.
Or strained relationships between the parents in a single or broken family situation, and the stresses that those, even if you're broken up with the person, you can still have stresses in the home, right?
Correct.
You can still be bringing it back into the home. How about you, Sam?
I think one of the things that stuck out to me that a lot of people don't realize is how early these interventions have to happen, right?
Yeah.
So I think the news was just out about high school graduation rates in South Bend, and they're going up, which is great.
Yeah.
But you don't do high school dropout intervention with 12th graders, right? Because it's too late.
Yeah.
So you've got to, where does that back up? Do you back it up to 9th grade? Do you back it up to 6th grade?
Yeah.
3rd grade I-STEP scores, kindergarten preparedness.
Yeah, because like the doctor was saying in the documentary, all of those things, your success in high school is really indicated in 3rd grade at your reading level, whether you're going to be right. So all of these things matter. And if you're just even starting with the serve and return and the interaction you're having with your baby, I mean, it's starting that soon. So there you go. Well, Wanda is out in the community, and she has a question from the group that was watching at Ivy Tech. Wanda? Wonderful things to say about him. Yes, ma'am.
I am live here at Ivy Tech Community College in South Bend, and we have a wonderful crowd of faculty and students with us. Joining me right now is Ms. Linda Taylor. She is the Associate Professor and Regional Department Chair of the School of Education for Ivy Tech Central North. Thank you so much for joining us. what did you think about the documentary? And more importantly, what did you think about all of your students coming in to support and view it?
I am so glad that we have so many students involved with our education programs and so many faculty that are supporting our students here. I think the information in the documentary is really important in our training program for teachers, both of early childhood programs and also for K-12, so that they understand the importance of how children learn and develop and how much that brain development happens so early and how much we need to be invested in making that happen.
Wonderful. We have a wonderful group here who are eager to share their concerns and their questions. Many of them can relate to some of the issues that were brought up in the documentary, so we look forward to sharing those questions and concerns with your panelists. Gwen?
Thank you, Wanda. And we have an audience here, too, and we're encouraging them to come up to the microphone in a bit and ask their questions of our panel as well. Well, we touched a little bit about the community and things that we're facing. What do you two think that we might be able to do as a community to maybe there's a movement that could be started from this film? I watched this film and I felt like, okay, this feels like a movement. Do you think that anything can be done in the South Bend region where people could feel empowered?
I think one of the big things is we need community volunteers, right? So daycare is expensive because the cost of staff in all those centers is an expense. And so, if we want to try to lower the costs and have community centers, churches, different places get involved in having quality child development programs, they're going to need folks that are going to step up and either volunteer their time or volunteer other resources they might have to help make those things happen, because it's got to drive the cost down. In the South Bend area, it's $800 a month to be in a decent child development program, and that's more than anybody in our neighborhoods rent. So that's we've got to bring that down, and that's how people can get engaged, by helping get more centers started, funding them, volunteering with them, and making sure that those things are there as a resource for our children.
Preston, what do you think are some things that we could do as a community?
I think that another thing that they brought about is that the employers, the employers need to be more liberal with the Family Leave Act that we've got. The employers need to be more giving of having people have time off for developing a child, 2 years. And here in the United States, we can't even get 12 weeks.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with us being the richest nation in the country and not being able to afford all those things, okay?
Yeah.
I want to take this back, Gwen, just a little bit to the environment.
Yes.
That's a part of the socioeconomic part of the environment. I don't care what it is, what you've got. And we know that even though sometimes our Granger, and I don't mean to offend anybody by saying Granger here, but we've got the same problems in Granger that we've got on Western Street.
Yeah.
So there's something wrong, and there's a social ill there that we need to try and correct somehow. And I don't know how to do that. Maybe it's what Sam is saying, bringing forth groups of people, volunteers. Who's got the time?
And who wants to devote, the time, but also find there's so many different things that could make things better, right? The government, trying to make some changes on the governmental level, federal level. We saw in the film how several times years ago this was brought up and even got through Congress, and then there were presidential vetoes. So as far as having paid leave, it almost seems like it's not valued, that we have a mentality on that level where we're not getting the time off for the parents, where we think that this time is not the fragile amount of time, critical time in the child's development. Like, we're not respecting that. We're thinking, oh, they're young and they're going to be okay, everything's going to be fine, they're not going to remember it. But how does this affect the brain of the child?
Actually, I'm baffled about this.
Yeah.
When we actually have to invest all this money for other resources, and the main investment for our children is actually lacking, and eventually we see this as complicated with mental illness. The number of we have 2 out of 10 children experience mental illness, and 1/3 of them have severe mood dysregulation, and that's really concerning. We try to be intervene and proactive and educate our community. We talk about community education and resources. We now start actually a group where we go to primary care physician and family doctors and pediatrician, try to provide awareness and early signs of mental illness, and obviously things like could be picked on early, because as we all talked about, the early intervention makes huge difference in the process and even the end result of prognosis for any like mental illness, as we talked about.
So. Are we starting to see those numbers get worse as far as are they growing, the mental illness problems?
So here are the last statistics we got from the American Academy of Child Psychiatry. If all the children need to be seen by child psychiatrists, the child has to wait for 1 year to see a psychiatrist for 1 hour.
Yeah.
That's how critical it is.
That's how critical it is.
And that's why we need help from all the resources we're actually reaching out in the community. So.
And most likely, if a family is reaching out because they've got a problem with mental illness in their family, it's probably a critical problem. And to wait a year would be very difficult, I'm sure. We have another question from Wanda, who's at Ivy Tech. Wanda?
Gwen, we're here with Veronica, who's from South Bend, and she's a special education major, so her goal is to be a teacher. What is it that you wanted to share with us today?
After watching the documentaries, it just came to thought that being an educator, you have to be mindful what these children are going through at home. You have to be respectful to their parents and make their care with you a vacation. You want to make them feel loved and make them feel welcome, because when they go back home, it might be different for them than with you.
Thank you so much. We have a number of other people who want to share their concerns and maybe even have some questions. For right now, we'll send it back to you, Gwen, in the studio.
Wanda, thank you so much. And we've got a question here in our studio as well. So with our audience, Beth, could you tell us what you would like to know about?
Sure. I have a question about the development of the brain. So clearly the early years are so important. Is the damage irrevocable? Is that something that years later there's any way of trying to catch up from the loss of early years?
Right. So it's always easier early. If you think about it as somebody learning to play the piano when they start at the age of 4 versus when they start at the age of my age, right? There's a fluidity and a natural skill that is just part of the essence of the person when it's early. Like how we all kind of think about empathy and things like that. Like that's one of those things that we just assign as a human quality. Well, when you don't grow up in an environment in which that is part of the learning, we've taken it for granted for a very long time that is part of who we are, but we're seeing now that it's not. It is indeed a learned skill that's been part of our environment. And it's not so much, as Preston mentioned, it's not necessarily a part of the environment anymore in which many, many children are being raised. The hopeful message is that the brain is so plastic. The brain is not done developing until the mid-20s. Right? So you have a tremendous amount of time to intervene. And although things do become harder to learn as one ages, it is never too late to learn. And the more you learn, the easier it is to learn. And what's critical in that is your belief, literally, about yourself.
And I think I want to just add to that we don't want to give up. So if someone who actually experienced a lot of stress in early childhood and he's right now in his mid-20s, as Nancy mentioned, we don't want to actually give up and say, okay, it's too late now to intervene and provide treatment. So we also have to have the hope, because we never know. We see always like miraculous changes in someone's behavior, even when they in their end of their treatment. So we always have to provide treatment and offer this all the time.
They talked in the film as though, I don't know, sometimes almost like we're at the front end of it, and if we don't do something, we're going to see a problem in 20 years. I wonder if we're already seeing a problem among adults who maybe, as children, experienced some of that lack of attention, or interaction, or whatever might have happened in a stressed home when they were a child. You two work in the community. Have you seen any evidence, or now are you maybe thinking after seeing the film, maybe there's something already happening?
I think that in the African American community, and I'd like for Doctor to answer this or help me answer it anyway, I think that it's not that they're getting that personal one-on-one, as we talked about the serve and return. They're getting it from technology. They're getting it, and that's a bad place to get it. Okay, that's the television, that's the game boards, and
the Facebook or social media.
And they're not getting the same thing that they're serving.
Boy, that's
the return is not coming to them. I could be right, wrong, or indifferent.
It's actually spot on. There's actually research that's showing that children anything too much is actually not good. Yeah. So children actually early on, the first 2 years of their life, in fact, kids when they are 4 years old, they're exposed to television 40 times more than 1970. So those kids who are exposed to the technology, the fast pace, they actually see all the, I don't want to like mention brand, but like all this kind of educational online videos where we actually, the single mom has to stick her baby in front of the iPad or the TV and she has to finish 10 million things. So those kids actually started to brainwire differently. And eventually, the inattention, as we actually call it ADHD in school, it started to actually have high chance, almost 30% higher than someone who actually did not spend that much time in front of like the media or the TV. So that's
ADHD might be more prevalent in children who might not have had as much interaction.
Yes. So cognitive, go ahead.
Think about it from a developmental standpoint, right? Mm-hmm. If you are sitting in this room, if you're sitting outside, how often does your scene change? Right? Over a minute or over a 5-minute period of time. The brain will learn about its environment no matter what that environment is. And so then you put it in front of the television. In the same 5 minutes, how often does the scene change? And from a very young age, that is, right, exactly. It's literally seconds. Yeah. Every couple seconds, the scene will change. Right. And so as the brain is developing and growing, that is then what the brain expects. And so if the brain does not get that in its natural environment, it behaviorally will create it by shifting attention from one thing to the other, by running around, by not sitting still. So it really, you are spot on. It does have a huge impact on brain development.
I think then that answers my question, and that is that as you begin to see kids in 1st through 4th grade, that's where you begin to see, and the doctors develop, and they talk about all these ADHDs and every other acronym from A to Z. And I think that what happens is that it happens because of the technology, and it doesn't happen because of the personal interaction with the child and the parent, be it male or female. The child, I think that you said a little bit earlier, it's just that they need that, and they don't get that with all this technology that we've got going on today.
So they get it where they can get it most immediately, most likely. Wanda, I understand that you've got more questions at Ivy Tech tonight.
Joining us now is Jonathan, who's a secondary education major. You want to work with kids in the high school level?
I do. My question is, if you think it was easier for education majors to get into the teaching field, would it help the problem?
Excellent question.
Did you hear the question?
Secondary education majors were something in the night.
Something about being in the teaching field. I mean, I know we need more qualified teachers. We need more folks that are working, also in this child development. I mean, that's part of what the issue is there's not enough centers, there's not enough places, there's wait lists.
Right.
It's also expensive because there's not a ton of competition. And so it's a myriad of things that have caused that. So more people in the field trying to help, I think will obviously help, try to either lower costs and increase quality for the consumer, the parents.
And sometimes in the schools, there are counselors or people who come into the schools or maybe even are on staff who can work with some of the kids, take them out of class if they need that special attention, perhaps working on something. Okay. We have a question in our studio, too. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I would. I was extremely impressed with the amount of talking they did on the film about stress and what that does to the tiniest little ones. And I just want to kind of ask a question and kind of make a point. To me, everybody in our society that I know around here is very well-meaning and wants to do the right thing for children, but the testing. I mean, just say the word test, and half the people in here will, it causes stress. And for some reason, our education is going down the road of testing. Let's test them more. Let's test them younger. Now they're talking about putting a test before they enter kindergarten. And I'm thinking, again, we're well-meaning, but please, what does it tell? For you experts, what is that doing? And can we make an impact on the community to say, please stop. Please go in a different way. Again, I have to stress, it's well-meaning, but I think it's hurting our children.
Yeah. Do you find, Dr. Michael and both doctors actually, if you'd like to comment on what the testing is. It's another stress. We've got a lot of stresses in our lives, but that is putting a lot
it's
on
actually
our
like a personal experience. My 4 years old who has to test before he entered kindergarten.
Well, true.
Yes.
That's right.
And he was eventually like stressed out about it. And I was the first time to see him very actually nervous. And the first thing he said, "Did I pass?" And I said, "Well, it's okay if you pass. It's not a pass or fail. But this is like the mentality that it's a test.
Yes.
It's not just like a fun when actually he used to go to the daycare. So definitely changing the mindset of the children early on, it could have an impact on how they perceive it in the future.
Yeah.
So,
How about you, Dr. Michael?
So assessment is necessary for education, right? We do have to know how these children are developing, but we have to, I think, focus on the skills that they need and not specifically the content, especially earlier in education. I have a 5-year-old, she started kindergarten this year, and their school, I really appreciate, does focus on the skill building, and if they build the appropriate skills, they figure that the test will take care of itself.
Right.
And I think I do agree with you that when you spend so much time on the test, it shifts the culture of the classroom, it shifts the mindset of the skill of the children, so that that is how they're measured and that's how they're worth
the test instead of yes. Well, we have time for one more question from Wanda. Wanda, what is that question?
We're here with Stephanie, and Stephanie is a secondary education major who wants to focus on math, emphasis on math. I bow down to you. You have a question for one of our panelists.
When I was first born, my mom was a nurse, and 2 months afterwards, she had to go straight back to work because we needed the money. My dad was going through cancer treatment, disability only went so far, and my mom didn't have any opportunity to stay with us. How do we get big businesses in our community to realize that their employees are more than employees, they're family people, they're people?
Excellent question. Gwen?
Thank you very much, Wanda. You two work in the community. What do you think we can do so that companies, local companies, for instance, might be able to give us a little more time with our families?
I said it doesn't necessarily have to be legislated, and I think it just takes one of the big fish in town to do it, and they'll gobble up all the best employees in town, and everyone else is going to do it. And they're going to have to realize that if they offer these type of benefits, this type of support for their employees, they're going to get the best folks. You know, we get called all the time by companies that have a hard time filling positions, and I'm like, oh, how much do you pay? That's why.
See? Preston, what do you think it's going to take?
I don't know, Gwen, I brought it up earlier, and I think that almost like Sam, that something has to be done to be able to allow our people to have more time to do this, which I like, the serve and return. And if we don't get it, it's not going to happen. Our numbers of disparities are going to go higher, and also our kids are going to be tested and tested and tested in answer to your question.
Yeah, that's right. Doctors, we only have less than a minute left, but what would you like to say in the last few seconds of the program? What can make a difference?
I think it's collaboration and the integration between all the services we have in the community. Volunteers, as Sam mentioned, we actually all have to reach out to all the resources, school. We actually would communicate with sometimes like Child Protective Service, and all this needs volunteering and working hard. And I think that's what's going to enrich our community at the end.
Very good. Dr. Michael?
Nobody has to do everything, but everybody's got to do something.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Even if you just turn off the TV one night a week and talk with your family.
Yeah. Have that eye contact. It's probably not just for your baby, right?
Nope,
you got to have that interaction
throughout.
We all need it.
We all need it.
Yeah, we need it. Adults need it too.
Yep,
That's right. Well, this was just our first conversation about the benefit of quality early childhood education and intervention, and really just changing how we're doing things. A special thanks to our panelists and our live audience here in the studio and at Ivy Tech Community College in South Bend. Next week, we will step back to the 1970s when the country had nearly had a world-class early education program for all students. We'll follow that for another discussion here in the studio at WNIT. Get involved in our ongoing conversation through Facebook, Twitter, or email. And please take a quick survey on the Raising of America page on WNIT.org. Find ways to get involved. I'm Gwen O'Brien. Thank you for watching.
The Michiana area presentation of the Raising of America on WNIT is presented by Beacon Health System. Additional support has been provided by